Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next half hour, we'll make a speed run through all the key business news stories you need to know about from across the African continent. From Cairo to Johannesburg, Lagos and Nairobi, we've got you covered. Here's what's coming up. Ditching the dollar for the renminbi, the Nigerian economy is to convert more of its dollar reserves into the Chinese currency. Zambia continues its readjustment after its president's demise. And why is South Africa's electricity reserve margin dangerously low yet again? We'll be live in Johannesburg to find out. Let's start in Africa's biggest economy. The Chinese ambassador to Nigeria has expressed support for the plan by the central bank over there to convert more of the country's foreign reserves into the yuan. According to the ambassador, Gu Xiaozhe, the holding of a bigger portion of Nigeria's $42 billion in reserves in yuan would demonstrate the closeness, quote-unquote, between both countries, which have an annual bilateral trade of about $13 billion. Now, earlier in the year, the CBN indicated that it would increase the yuan share of reserves to as much as 7% from 2% at the time. About 80% of Nigeria's foreign currency reserves are currently held in the greenback. Under the former governor, Lamido Sanusi, the bank had said Nigeria planned to reach a target of holding 10% of its reserves in yuan. The CBN started diversifying its reserves into the Chinese currency steadily in 2011. It is working with the People's Bank of China to boost the holdings as soon as relevant structures are in place. Now, Zambia's finance ministry has assured investors in the country that the economy is stable and policies will not change following the death of President Michael Sata. Fred Sonyamba, a ministry representative, appealed to all economic actors to desist from what he described as speculative action that may cause instability in the wider economy. The Zambian kwacha was down 2% against the American dollar after news of Sata's death broke earlier this week on Tuesday. Traders say the currency is unlikely to suffer any prolonged weakness due to the underlying health of the economy. Zambia's economy is forecast to grow by about 7% this year. Now, in farming, especially if you're an African farmer, timing is everything. Miss out on the early rains, you could get a very lousy harvest at best, no harvest at all in some cases. As weather patterns change across the continent, the risk of such losses is going up, and many small-scale farmers, the ones who produce the bulk of the food eaten in Africa, must adapt. As Farai Mokhtar reports, Zambia is now promoting conservation agriculture as the ideal solution.
It's late October. The rainy season is still weeks away, but Grace Willinger's field is already prepared for planting, which she will do the day after the first rains fall. It's a departure from how she used to do it when she turned to farming 20 years ago, after her late husband lost his job.
The first time in 1994 when I tried farming, I got 9 bags. To me that was a bit better, at least I had enough food. Then the second year I had 17 bags. That was in 1995. Then in 1996 I tried to use this potholing where you have to prepare basins in advance. So that same year I tried to put up 1 hectare. And from 1 hectare for the first time I got to 78 bags.
She's practicing conservation farming, a method that prepares only the land that will be used for planting, promotes use of herbicides instead of weeding, and ensures that nothing goes to waste, even the old stock from last year's harvest.
There are 3 reasons why we maintain this. One is to provide food to the termites to reduce costs, because if I ban these, it means extra cost for me to buy termite and spray. Second, it adds value to the soil. Third, it protects it from the sun, from soil erosion.
It's yet another sweltering summer day here in Zambia. The sad thing is, over time, the temperatures will get warmer and the rains more erratic. And that's why conservation farming is becoming so important. And this country is leading the charge in Africa. The Conservation Farming Unit is targeting 45,000 farmers here in the central region, but 180,000 nationally.
It seems an insurmountable task, but they are using lead farmers to win converts. One of them is John Tati, who is dispelling a myth that conservation farming is for the poor.
You can imagine I'm doing 20 hectares. Somebody comes with a hoe and said, no, it should be potholing. And I look at the field. You see, it was somehow practically impossible. But when the things moved, it changed. Now it became mechanized. So, so there is this. Let's try.
It's helping him beat the effects of climate change.
It rains very late. And it puts you in an awkward position. For you now, maybe it rains in December, like last year. It was about the 13th December. That's when we had our first rains here. Now, if I was waiting to start plowing and planting, that would mean maybe I would have finished planting maybe in January. But with conservation, I'll just count maybe 5 days, 7 days at the most, I'm done everything.
And not too long from now, Grace Mulenga, who named her farm Emai, meaning mother, will receive another bountiful harvest, provision that any loving mother would give to her child. Arai Mwakutuya, CCTV, Kabwe, Zambia.
Now, we're still in Zambia. There are indications that the nation might be backing away fairly slowly from plans to impose a 20% royalty rate on open pit mining. The Finance Minister, Alexander Chikwanda, rattled mining companies operating in Zambia when he announced that royalties on open pit mines will rise to 20% and on underground mines to 8% from the current figure of 6%. Barrick Gold, the world's biggest gold producer, which also happens to own the Lumwana copper mine in Zambia, says a 20% royalty would seriously challenge the economics of a large open pit mine. The death of Michael Saturn, a period of national mourning, however, could affect the timing of any new regulations which were due to come into effect on the 1st of January 2015. Let's make a quick run through the markets here for you. Fairly positive day across the board for a lot of the bourses that we track here across the continent. The EGX 30 was closed. However, we're looking at the year-to-date return over there. Some fairly spectacular numbers. 36.58% is the number so far this year. Electricity reserve margins in South Africa are dangerously low. Why has this happened? We'll be live in Joburg. And we continue our focus on medical tourism in South Africa. All that and more is coming up next. Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies. We help you make sense of the fast-changing African business landscape. We take you where the business is happening.
Effects of the austerity measures are evident and were expected. Egyptians, however, seem to be patient about it. But El-Sisi told government he wants to control the prices promptly before people's patience runs out.
Ten minutes into the hour, you're still watching Global Business Africa from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Now, let's get on to Zimbabwe, where the European Union has lifted some of its decade-long economic sanctions on the Southern African country, and that effectively paves the way for the state to benefit from the 11th European Development Fund. That covers a period between 2015 and 2020. From next year, the bloc will start a $300 million 5-year funding program to support health, agriculture and governance projects. President Robert Gabriel Mugabe has regularly demanded the removal of all sanctions. He says they're illegal and he blames them for the country's economic crises. Sanctions on Mr. Mugabe and his wife Grace, however, still remain in force. They are due for review in February next year. Apart from suspending direct aid, the EU also imposed travel restrictions and asset freezes on Mr. Mugabe, his family, political associates and senior government officials. These, however, have been progressively eased since 2009, and the lifting of the measures is effective from the 1st of November this year. Now, further, South Africa's biggest single vertically integrated utility, Eskom, may have to resort to rolling blackouts from 1600 GMT on Friday in order to stabilize the national grid, as the system is, and I'm quoting officials here, severely constrained. Now, Eskom has alerted its key industrial customers of the crisis, and it's told them they have to cut their consumption by at least 10%. Consumers have also been advised to switch off their geysers, their pool pumps and all non-essential appliances during peak consumption hours as well. Let's head over to Johannesburg, where Angelo Coppola is live at the moment. Thankfully, there's still electricity supply over there to find out what's going on. Angelo, earlier this week, Eskom said that the crisis was manageable. Today, we're hearing that the grid is severely constrained. How did we get to this point?
Well, Raman, in fact, it's been constrained for 2 days now. And late this afternoon, Eskom came, spokesperson I spoke with said the system seemed to have stabilized a little because the usage has dropped off as we're going into the weekend. Eskom uses summer months to do its routine maintenance on its national grid. The problem is that some of the units that are meant to be running to pick up the slack while those other units are being maintained have broken down. So as it stands right now, it is a little constrained, but we haven't seen that many rolling blackouts as of yet, Raman.
Indeed, but is this latest crisis just down to a failure of some generation power plants, or are there also issues to do with transmission and distribution too?
Well, you need to think of the national grid in South Africa as a house of cards. Units on the grid have been running without their regular maintenance stops or checks for a while now. So components are wearing out, equipment is breaking down, and regular maintenance can't be done because the grid is so stretched already and those units are operating at almost full capacity. So there's no one unit or one transmission line that's broken down. But what's also happening is in the city centres, the utilities or the municipalities that are responsible for electricity are also experiencing some shortages. So it's really a case of a series of small faults that are causing this house of cards to collapse. Raman?
Indeed. Let's focus on the financial health of Eskom, however. Do we have any more clarity on where, how and when South Africa's government will be raising the funds for the cash injection that the finance minister spoke of a couple of weeks ago?
Well, as you know, Minister Nene did come out and say they're probably going to sell off some of the state assets to provide some of the equity. But we haven't had any further clarity on what assets he's actually talking about. Some commentators are suggesting that it's probably about time that the government got rid of its stake in Vodacom, which should put a couple of $1 billion into the pot to take care of some of that equity stake that government has undertaken to provide to Eskom. But what we do know is that funding will come, or there will be some funding that will come from consumers. We're going to be hit with a double increase next year, and what we don't know as consumers just yet is what the quantum of that increase is going to be. Raman?
Indeed. Finally, Angelo, Fitch Ratings changed the outlook on Eskom to negative earlier this week. How exactly did the utility respond?
Well, strangely enough, Eskom seemed to be quite happy. They say that Fitch has now reaffirmed the current status, and the agency, according to Eskom, has acknowledged that the government support program and package is actually providing stability that it needs. In fact, its new CEO was saying that the rating will probably help them raise capital in the global bond markets. The issue really is whether the market is going to believe or be as upbeat and believe the story that we're being told at the moment as its CEO is. We'll probably only find out when those bonds go to market and whether there is any appetite there. Raman?
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Always glad to have Angelo Coppola live in South Africa, especially now that there are no rolling blackouts, at least with respect to that particular link. Let's move on to medical tourism. In South Africa, it's becoming increasingly popular. In the second part of our focus on this particular aspect of the economy, Sumitra Naidu examines how millions from sub-Saharan Africa now use South Africa as their destination of choice for healthcare or even elective cosmetic surgery.
Elective cosmetic surgery used to be reserved for Hollywood stars and the rich elite, but now more people are wanting to have such procedures done. And while you're having a nip and tuck, why not throw in a short holiday? International travellers are now choosing South Africa as the place to do it. Companies like Surgeon and Safari facilitate travel arrangements for people wanting to have anything from a tummy tuck to a facelift.
I offered to facilitate the procedure, the health aspect of it, and also to offer accommodation packages. In the early days, I only used the Orient Express Hotel, which in those days was the Westcliff Hotel on the Mount Nelson in Cape Town. But with it was offering medical concierge. So basically someone could arrive here and someone would actually nurture them throughout the entire process and then organise their safari.
It's estimated that a medical traveller spends between $8,000 and $10,000 for an average 10-day stay in South Africa, which includes surgery and a recuperation period.
If someone decides to have a breast augmentation, the average cost of a breast augmentation is about $4,000. The accommodation side would be about $1,000. And then obviously the extras, they would most probably spend about $2,000 to $3,000.
It's a growing phenomenon. While people from Europe have for a long time travelled to destinations like South Africa for medical and cosmetic procedures, the market is starting to attract the growing middle class in Africa.
How medical tourism works is really a financial choice that customers have, and developing economies tend to offer private healthcare at a value for money rate versus your America and the UK.
But it's not all about vanity. South Africa has some of the best reconstructive surgeons in the world.
The standard of care in many of our hospitals, the fact that we've got well-trained professionals that compare to the world's best, we've got good research facilities as well, and I think we're world-class in many of the medical and surgical treatments we offer, and that reputation I think is becoming more and more known in the rest of the world.
Dr. Ridwan Mia was thrown into the spotlight in 2013 when he helped spearhead a revolutionary skin graft operation for a 3-year-old little girl who had 80% degree burns. It was the first skin transplant to be done in Africa and was a huge success.
I have an interest in certain reconstructive procedures and congenital abnormalities. I also treat burn wounds. Open wounds is another field that plastic surgeons look after. I tend to keep a lot of my practice directed towards those sorts of patients. We see more medical funders bringing their patients for care to Johannesburg. I think the cost factor is a plus in that way. So we've seen a big increase in the last few years from patients from up north.
But treatment doesn't come cheap for doctors too, who have to consider the liability costs.
The Medical Protection Society limits South African doctors to 20 foreign patients a year, at least South African plastic surgeons, and if you treat more of them per year, then the price or the cost of your medical insurance goes up.
While the medical tourism industry in South Africa is growing, India remains a leading destination for medical travel because of its low costs. China and the Middle East are also increasingly being considered for treatment. Sumitra Naidu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Let's make a quick run now through commodity prices here for you. Fairly interesting day across the market. With regard to coffee and cocoa prices as well, they're all coming under quite a bit of pressure. Of course, some decent weather coming through in Brazil. That's having an effect on Arabica futures. However, of interest to us is cocoa. Fresh supplies have been coming through from West Africa. The fears that had come through originally that were sending cocoa prices up past $3,000 a ton. Those are completely out of whack now, back down to about $28.99 per metric ton. We'll be turning the spotlight next to a Ugandan entrepreneur who's put his country in the global tech limelight. All that and more is coming up next. Welcome back to the program. Let's take you to Uganda now. One of that country's citizens, Jasper Onono, has joined the growing ranks of East Africa's tech whiz kids who are propelling the region into the global tech spotlight. He developed a gaming application and customized it to its local market. His creation graces our grassroots business segment tonight.
Techpreneur Jasper Onono is the man behind the much talked about Matatu application in Uganda. The traditional two-player card game app is different from the normal mobile phone games because it is customized to cater for the needs of the local market.
It's actually the most popular game in Uganda right now. So the idea came up back in campus when we were attending a conference, and a thought just hit us that why don't people have this game in their phones? Can we do this game?
In the year 2011, Matatu was a finalist in Google's Android Developer Challenge for Sub-Saharan Africa. The search engine provided the developers with mentorship, as well as having the app hosted in Google Play Store and on the Google Cloud. Now the app has more than 60,000 downloads.
I like having it on the phone because then I can play it anytime, and even when I'm alone, I don't need to have friends around or a group of people. I can just have it on my phone, play it anytime, anywhere, and it's fun.
From the laying of fiber optic cables to popular mobile money systems, East Africa has experienced a dramatic tech hub boom, spurred by the collaborative workspaces such as Kenya's iHub and the growing international investment.
If we can have a place whereby somebody can say, when they're listing in the top 5 apps on their phone, we'll have at least 1 or 2 Kenyan or African apps on it, I feel like that will go a long way in encouraging other young people to begin to believe that there is more potential than what they see. We're not just consumers of content, but we're creators of it.
Analysts say the future is bright for African techpreneurs. With the right guidance and mentorship, capital and investment, the continent might just be the next Silicon Valley. Peter Kaba, CCTV.
Now, over the years, South Africa, of course, has slowly moved away from being heavily dependent on revenues from its mining sector. The African nation is hosting an industry expo in Beijing that features high-end machinery, wines and much more in a bid to encourage investors to tap into other parts of Africa's second-largest economy. CCTV's Ming Tian was at the expo and found this report.
Do you care for a luxury outstretched handbag or a glass of fine wine? South Africa is offering a wide range of products that includes wine, bags and much more to the Chinese market as it seeks to broaden its trade spectrum far beyond its usual method of trading mineral resources for finished machinery.
We realized that there was a need to address much more the structural balance in the trade relationship, and in particular to support encourage more value-added supplies into the Chinese market from South Africa.
Over 50 exhibitors joined the South African Expo in China this year. Most of the companies, though, are still fresh to the country, but they're shooting high and eyeing for a larger Chinese market.
There's currently a lot of synergies, if I can put it that way, in terms of the automakers that are in South Africa are also in China, and automotive is a key area of interest for our company, where we have got expertise in.
Because in South Africa, all my customers are Chinese ladies that live in South Africa, and they love the ostrich. They know all about the ostrich birds, and they buy ostrich from me at my factory. So when the opportunity came to join our government mission to come out, I decided to come and see what the reaction is of the local, of the Chinese in China.
And for Chinese companies, the trade with South Africa is also a new dish on the table. The yuan is developing foreign trade for the Hometown International Group, whose Beijing office will open in January. Li thinks South African wines have great potential in China.
We used to do expensive wines such as French wines, which is not well received among common people. South African wines, on the other hand, are most cost-friendly here, and I'm very interested in it.
Experts say that less than 7% of South African exports to China are value-added products, and with more businesses exploring the market, a new page in the two countries' trade relationship is set to turn. Ming Tian, CCTV, Beijing.
Let's make a quick run through the currencies. Of course, the ripple effects of the Fed's decision earlier on Wednesday still continue to ripple across the market. The rand, of course, did take quite a hit. It's going as low as 11.043 in trading today. Interesting comments here from the outgoing governor of the South African Reserve Bank. Quote, in the end, the Fed will take decisions about what is in the best interest of the United States. But it cannot ignore the fact that it has an impact on emerging markets. And that, of course, is going to be something we'll hear plenty about moving forward. But that's it for this edition of Global Business. Thank you so much for watching. Send your feedback on the program to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And, of course, whenever you're offline, the news continues 24/7 on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you over there. I'm Ramanyang from Nairobi. Mahimutu is up next with Matchpoint.